Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're here with Lars. This is another game by a creator I'm really enjoying, Hankworx. Let's read through the description here real quick and then I'll get into all that. Lars is a short, depressive text adventure about dealing with the horrors of the human mind and the situation at hand. For fans of Lovecraft, text adventures, Stephen King, retro horror, and Silent Hill, contains depressing themes and music. Obviously, I am a fan of all of these things, so this is right up my alley. Hankworx did. Not only did he do not only did they do, I don't want to make any assumptions here, not only did they do Sheila and the Seven Gates to Hell, but they did another game called The Caretaker that I didn't realize until after I'd played Sheila. And The Caretaker was a really strong entry in the previous Scream Jam. So didn't even realize it until after the fact. I put a little thing in the description there, but just didn't even cross my mind. So Caretaker was one of my favorites from the previous Scream season is what it was called. Anyway, so here's Lars. Click the mouse button anywhere on the screen or the return enter button to continue the story. Occasionally, you will be prompted with decisions to make in order to progress. Use the mouse button to select one. No, you may only choose one and they will affect the game. So I just picked a random Hankworx game that sounded cool, looked cool. So, if this is... if Hankworx is not particularly proud of this one, sorry in advance. A few months ago, Lars received a suspicious letter from someone claiming to be a distant relative of his. The letter, though smudged and written in a seemingly hurried disposition, had left Lars with a certain sense of bewilderment. It was only after thorough research that Lars learned the location of the letter's origin. Lars, I hope this letter reaches you in time before you do something foolish. I have kept silent for over half my life, but now I must do something, and I need your help. You've been having the nightmares too, I assume, and most likely even more severe than the rest of us. These dreams are just the beginning. Your grandfather and I were in charge of an experiment gone awry, and it haunts our genes to this day. The details aren't important, but just know, you and everyone you love could potentially be in danger. Do not focus on your dreams, do not bring the manifestations of your own mind into the world, and under no circumstances should you fall asleep without an appropriate amount of substance abuse. Signed, a concerned relative. The letter frightened for a number of reasons. The main one being that everything somehow made sense to him. The author had given no means of contact, spouted plenty of unverifiable nonsense, and recommended nightly substance abuse, but somehow seemed like the only person in the world with the knowledge to help Lars. He had recently been plagued by nightmares. Alcohol and drugs were the only way he could get any sleep. Kind of like how what was that, a squirrel? Squirrel moved out of the way for the text. It's fun little extra in there. After a few weeks in tracing the postage stamp back to a rural mailbox in Pennsylvania, Lars found himself on the road in the middle of the night. Jobless, directionless, and alone was the only way forward. It had been that way long before Lars received the letter, but it was going to continue that way until he did something about it. Only with every mile he traveled deeper into the forest, his old Buick bucked and howled from all angles, sounding more like a human in pain than a malfunctioning engine. This is horribly unprofessional of me, but I have to go get something out of the oven. I will be back. All right, and I'm back. I was making Irish soda bread, in case anyone was curious. As the engine sputtered until it could sputter no more, Lars yanked the shifter from neutral into neutral and coasted to the side of the road. Although he never considered himself a mechanic, he did breathe a sigh of relief knowing that he was only a few miles from the mailbox where his mysterious letter began its journey. Before Lars got out of the car, he grabbed a pack of cigarettes and a lighter, grabbed a jacket, grabbed the whiskey out of the back, got the flashlight. Let's see, what would I do? I would definitely grab a flashlight in this scenario. Who knows? The night air was humid. A warm breeze blew the same direction the car was traveling. A driveway nearby. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're here with Lars. This is another game by a creator I'm really enjoying, Hankworx. Let's read through the description here real quick and then I'll get into all that. Lars is a short, depressive text adventure about dealing with the horrors of the human mind and the situation at hand. For fans of Lovecraft, text adventures, Stephen King, retro horror, and Silent Hill. Contains depressing themes and music. Obviously, I am a fan of all of these things, so this is right up my alley. Hankworx did, not only did they do, I don't want to make any assumptions here, not only did they do Sheila and the Seven Gates to Hell, but they did another game called The Caretaker that I didn't realize until after I'd played Sheila. And The Caretaker was a really strong entry in the previous Scream Jam. So didn't even realize it until after the fact. I put a little thing in the description there, but just didn't even cross my mind. So Caretaker was one of my favorites from the previous Scream Jam. Scream Season is what it was called. Anyway, so here's Lars. Click the mouse button anywhere on the screen or the return enter button to continue the story. Occasionally, you will be prompted with decisions to make in order to progress. Use the mouse button to select one. No, you may only choose one and they will affect the game. So I just picked a random Hankworx game that sounded cool, looked cool. So, if this is, if Hankworx is not particularly proud of this one, sorry in advance. A few months ago, Lars received a suspicious letter from someone claiming to be a distant relative of his. The letter, though smudged and written in a seemingly hurried disposition, had left Lars with a certain sense of bewilderment. It was only after thorough research that Lars learned the location of the letter's origin. Lars, I hope this letter reaches you in time before you do something foolish. I have kept silent for over half my life, but now I must do something, and I need your help. You've been having the nightmares too, I assume, and most likely even more severe than the rest of us. These dreams are just the beginning. Your grandfather and I were in charge of an experiment gone awry, and it haunts our genes to this day. The details aren't important, but just know, you and everyone you love could potentially be in danger. Do not focus on your dreams, do not bring the manifestations of your own mind into the world, and under no circumstances should you fall asleep without an appropriate amount of substance abuse. Signed, a concerned relative. The letter frightened for a number of reasons. The main one being that everything somehow made sense to him. The author had given no means of contact, spouted plenty of unverifiable nonsense, and recommended nightly substance abuse, but somehow seemed like the only person in the world with the knowledge to help Lars. He had recently been plagued by nightmares. Alcohol and drugs were the only way he could get any sleep. Kind of like how squirrel moved out of the way for the text. It's a fun little fun little extra in there. After a few weeks and tracing the postage stamp back to a rural mailbox in Pennsylvania, Lars found himself on the road in the middle of the night. Jobless, directionless, and alone was the only way forward. It had been that way long before Lars received the letter, but it was going to continue that way until he did something about it. Only with every mile he traveled deeper into the forest, his old Buick bucked and howled from all angles, sounding more like a human in pain than a malfunctioning engine. This is horribly unprofessional of me, but I have to go get something out of the oven. I will be back. All right, and I'm back. I was making Irish soda bread, in case anyone was curious. As the engine sputtered until it could sputter no more, Lars yanked the shifter from neutral into neutral and coasted to the side of the road. Although he never considered himself a mechanic, he did breathe a sigh of relief knowing that he was only a few miles from the mailbox where his mysterious letter began its journey. Before Lars got out of the car, he grabbed a pack of cigarettes and a lighter, grabbed a jacket, grabbed the whiskey out of the back, got the flashlight. Let's see, what would I do? I would definitely grab a flashlight in this scenario. Who knows? The night air was humid. A warm breeze blew the same direction the car was traveling. A driveway nearby, partnered with a visibly full mailbox, didn't appear to be too frequently used. The mountains stretched for miles in all directions, and the driveway seemed to be the only way to go, other than aimlessly walking down the road. The darkness surrounded Lars in every direction. The hairs on the back of his neck rose ever so slightly. His father had never spoken of his time as a scientist. Lars didn't even know where his father was for the last 6 years of his life, and his father never chose to speak of it. Although the time he did spend raising Lars, he may as well have been gone. It frightened Lars to realize how much of a similar man he'd grown to be. His father drank himself to death by the age of 45, and Lars was on the fast track to expire before he hit 40. Lars realized his only option was to follow the driveway, but first, let's check let's read the options here. Check the mailbox, check the trunk, pop the hood, checked his cell phone. So, the car, whatever. Checking the mailbox, it's stuffed full. We don't really... I feel like his cell phone and his car, those are lost causes. We're not going to get anywhere with that. So it's either, do we feel like there's something else we need to bring with us, or do we need more information? Well, I'm going to go with more information. Why not? I don't know if this is going to be anything, but we'll see. The mailbox was stuffed to the brim with various notices and bills. There were stacks of bills and late notices, and behind them all a small box. The box was addressed to Jane Sakowitz. Lars shook the box close to his ear, but he didn't hear anything. He couldn't resist a strange compulsion to tear open the box, not that he had any idea what was inside. Letting temptation get the best of him, he ripped the corners off the box without even considering the morality of it. Lars reached into the box, only to pull out a doll, poorly made out of coarse wood. The doll's hair almost reflected the moonlight for a brief moment. Lars put the doll back in the box and returned it to its original spot in the mailbox. Although it was quite obvious someone opened the package, Lars considered the crime he'd just committed and the reasons for it, then quickly pushed the thoughts to the darkest depths of his mind. Feeling the temperature drop and his stomach start to grumble, Lars walked forward into the night, hoping to find food and shelter before it was pitch black. He mainly wanted a strong drink, but that would have to wait until he found out what waited further up the driveway. He tried to suppress the thoughts that had only but that it only made them more incessant. He tried to find peace in the calm sounds of the night forest, but only heard empty silence weighing itself down into the ground between the branches of the trees. As he traveled north, he began to clearly hear the sound of water. All right. I gotta say, one thing about Hankworx is that they've always got a distinctive aesthetic to their games. And it's something I really appreciate. It's also kind of interesting to see that, because this was submitted to something along the lines of, my first game jam. So it's kind of interesting to see it now and compare it to something like Sheila, and you see this sort of huge jump in quality between the two, even though you see the glimpses of what was to come here. It's kind of interesting to see in some ways. So anyway, let's get back in. Not far from the road, Lars found his way to a picturesque country scene. He couldn't help but think of his father again when he saw the canoe docked just a few steps from the driveway. He unintentionally blurted a noise from his mouth in an attempt to push the thought from his mind, but it didn't help. He stared at the water with contempt, as if he saw all the water's secrets. Somewhere in the reflection of the water, Lars saw a shadow for a short glimpse. Lars had nightmares every night for over the past year, but for as long as he could remember, he had nightmares of drowning. He'd had many other dreams of morbid experiences his whole life, falling to his death, crushed in a car collision, or public execution, but drowning was always the most frequent and the most prominent. The main difference between the dreams of his childhood and his recent recurring ones was that, as a child, when he hit the ground in his dreams, he'd wake up. But the past year, that's just when the dream has started. Despite his awareness from the start of the dream that the dream is indeed a dream, he can't help but experience the pain. The feeling would remain for what would seem like days. He'd often have varying experiences of different afterlives, and Lars would have himself physically trapped in his own mental world. Lars believed somewhere in his mind that his brain wires, as he saw them, were hooked up wrong. If someone could fix his wires, maybe he could sleep like a normal person. Lars's left eye twitched as his body recalled the physical pain. He took a few steps towards the water. A momentary panic swept through him with every step he took, but he verbally told himself that everything was fine. The dock was in a bit of disrepair, but the canoe itself seemed to be in pristine condition. Whoever lived here cared more for their canoe than they did for receiving their mail. Lars heard a few twigs snap close by, most likely from some animal, he thought. He moved towards a closed gate at the end of the driveway. The gate was locked with a heavy chain and a padlock. It looked like nobody had opened it for some time. The gate touched the earth at the very bottom, but there were no indications in the ground of it having been moved. Lars wondered if there was even anybody or anything left beyond the gate. Maybe they moved out, took everything out of the house, leaving only the canoe behind. It didn't matter to Lars if the house were empty of all of one thing: booze. In fact, he saw that as the best case scenario in his predicament. He didn't want to talk to anyone. He didn't want to call someone to fix his car, and he most certainly didn't want to be treated as a guest in someone else's home. He just wanted to drink in a dark room with nothing and nobody in it. Lars looked back and forth at the rock wall supporting the gate. He could probably climb over the wall. It would have been much easier for him years ago, he thought to himself. The wall continued into the forest in both directions, most likely covered the property. Lars wished he could have a wall like this in his mind for the world, only there wouldn't be a gate, no access, no entry, 24/7, 365. He'd once been able to find joy and comfort in the company of others, but the older he became, the more the presence of others drained his apathy. When the hollow shell of feeling nothing was removed, there was just a bad egg on the inside. Well, Lars felt confident in his ability to climb over the gate, but he was worried how his body might handle it. He didn't want to sleep on the ground for the rest of the night, and if he did, he didn't want to do it just on the other side of the gate. He decided he should stretch, but drew a bit of a blank when he thought of what to stretch first. He hadn't done any kinds of physical activity in years apart from what his job required. He thought maybe he'd start touching his toes. He slowly bent down and was fairly ashamed of barely making it halfway between his kneecaps and his feet. He slowly tried to extend his arms, but the unfamiliarity he'd put his muscles through was more painful than the physical pain he'd feel when he died in his dreams. He belted a noise out of his mouth, a combination of maniacal laughter and pathetic whimper. "Hey, mister, what do you think you're doing?" The voice came from the direction of the pond. Lars turned towards the voice and saw a young, red-headed girl perched on top of a rock. She couldn't have been more than 12 years old. Her tone was almost inviting, while somehow being insulting at the same time. She looked Lars up and down. "You some kind of detective or something?" Again, the words coming out of her mouth had a sarcastic yet inquisitive undertone. She was perceptive enough, yet almost seemed to not believe anything. Lars continued to blankly stare at the little girl, unable to produce any words from his mouth. The child seemed to see right through him already, and he hadn't said a word. "My mother always taught me that it's rude to not respond to someone when they talk to you." Lars was immediately reminded of his ex-wife. He had spent over 15 years having a similar one-way conversations, where all his dialogue was inside of his head. He couldn't bring the things he wanted to say to his mouth, for he knew the adverse effects it would have on the rest of this child's life. His fists gently clenched, and he had made a conscious effort to stop because she noticed immediately. Lars mustered up the courage and introduced himself, asked how to open the gate. "Well, we're going with what I would personally do if I was Lars. I mean, not Lars as in how he is as a person, but it was just me, you know. It's interesting. I've noticed this in The Caretaker. Hankworx does do a lot of these very dark stories. And that was one thing that was kind of cool about Sheila, was that there was some comedy to it, which I think is something I'd like to see Hankworx do more of incorporating a little bit of that weirdness that I know is there, to just soften some of this a little bit, because I got this way playing The Caretaker as well, where it's just kind of like you get to a point and you're like, man, this is just so, there's got to be some light in here somewhere, But anyway, I'm going to introduce myself. "Hi, I'm Lars. What's your name? Do you live here?" She gave Lars two more once-overs, looked past the gate and back to Lars. "Gee, mister, you sure look like you could use a nap." Lars considered mentioning how it was rude not to respond to people, but he was too tired to argue. This little girl knew more about him than he did, just by looking at him. He couldn't even remember what sleep was supposed to feel like anymore, but he could really use a nap, a permanent one, he thought to himself. Sleep was harder for Lars to tolerate more so than daily life. He put his hands in the pockets of his jeans. "Hey, that's my dolly. Why do you have it? I hope you cleaned it up." Lars had felt something in his pockets. He pulled it out and immediately realized it was the doll he had ripped out of its packaging, like a madman just minutes before. He thought he'd put it back in the box. He was certain he put it back in the box. But here it was in his hands, and it belonged to this little girl. A girl whose name he couldn't remember, but he had read it just moments ago. Yeah, you got me. Okay. As Lars looked at the doll looked back at him. The wood felt warm to the touch and brought him a strange sense of relief, until he recalled putting it back in the mailbox. For the sake of his sanity, he was quite willing to be relieved of the doll. I want to say it was like Jeanette or something like that. I feel like it started with a J, but now I'm really not sure. You got me, Hank. You got me. Lars looked up only to see the girl had up and vanished. He spun as if to catch her on the way to a hiding spot, but she was nowhere to be seen. He was alone. After a brief moment of silence to see if he could hear anything, Lars realized that the gate, which had been thoroughly padlocked moments ago, was standing wide open. He questioned his sanity once more, did one more perimeter check, and walked through the open gate. Alright, so we have what appears to be an unreliable narrator, which is totally my jam. Love it. Gotta say, this music, which is always something Hankworx does really well, it's impeccable music. It's just great. It's dissonant, noisy, it's just great. Fits the theme, fits the tone of the game really well. And I gotta appreciate that there's so many of them so far. I don't know how much further we have, but I like how, we've got all these different tracks for each part. And it's not just listening to the same loop over and over again. So anyway, going back in. Had he lost his mind? Was that girl real? He couldn't think anymore. He hardly took notice of the endless stalks of corn that surrounded him. Lars wondered if he should even wonder anymore. His thoughts brought him here, and he had no idea what he was doing. With every step he took, he felt he lost more of himself and more of his sanity. The night sky had changed into a deathly hue of grays and reds that lit up the sky. He began to think he'd been dreaming, but for how long? And what did the letter mean about manifestations? It all made less and less sense the more he thought about it. The girl, that nameless girl, he thought. She had to be behind this somehow. He couldn't piece together how she'd been responsible for his poor grip on reality, but he needed somebody to blame. This wasn't Lars's fault. Excellent, excellent. All he ever tried to do was the right thing. In his own mind, he'd just been taken advantage of by a witch, the same witch it had been his whole life, just in different forms. His mother, his ex-wife, and this little girl, all pieces of the same puzzle. Lars thought about how, when you lose a piece of the puzzle, it can never be complete. He turned off the flashlight. This is so good. This music's great. Lars pulled the doll out of his pocket again, thinking back to the child, and the moment he ripped the doll out of its packaging. It had looked brand new then, poorly made but still brand new. Now it looked 100 years old. The bristly white hair had originally been so tough it could cut you, but Lars found the few fragments of wire hair which remained felt just as soft as real hair. It looked a lot like the mysterious girl he'd just met. As he ran his fingers across the back of the wooden doll, he felt a strange sense of nostalgia. He felt a tingling sensation in his own back, same place where he was touching the doll. He sank down on his knees in the dirt. He didn't hear a noise in the cornfield. He just looked down at his hands in the ground. He might have been ready to give up altogether. The wind started to swirl through the field, and the leaves on the stalks began to whistle. He didn't see the point in living when nothing in his life could top the moment he had on his knees in the cornfield. A disturbing, violent noise got louder as it approached Lars. He got up and gave up. Well, let's just at least be on our feet, right? Lars, listen to me carefully. I don't have much time. Don't waste your breath speaking. You know what you did, right? You pretend you don't, but I think you know. For your whole life you've been running from it, but you can't hide from me. I've always been there. I've been whatever you thought you needed. If I'm just another voice inside your head, why don't you just drown me out? You've made choices in your life that many would disagree with. I know how much you like to blame the world for all your problems. But you have been the one responsible for your own decisions. You do somehow possess a reasonable ability to place your body's needs over your emotional ones. Survival is the ultimate determining factor of natural selection. Humans have grown so disconnected from reality that they no longer fear death. However, find no comfort in the fact that you've survived this long. You would have ended up here no matter what. What do you think? How do you think you got that letter in the first place? That's a rhetorical question. When I've finished what I have to say, you may ask a question if there is time. You have a material outlook on the world that prevents you from expanding your own horizons. You often wish you'd figured things out for yourself, but then spend your time and money on possessions, which you rely on more than your own intellect. I can't tell you why humans were created, but I know it wasn't to collect material possessions. You do possess interpersonal skills, but lack the confidence to use them when needed. More is lost by indecision than wrong decision. The whole reason I'm telling you all this is because there's something you need to understand. You're responsible for the person you've chosen to become. You might blame it on the world, God, your family, your friends, or lack thereof, but ultimately everything you've done and everything you've chosen to let yourself become has been something you've allowed yourself to do. No, this shouldn't be something that has to be said, but I still don't think you understand. Perhaps you never will. If you still want to blame world, we will meet again. I may not speak again, but when the time is right, I'll be there. Audio log, December 13/4/17. Employee ID 343177. Case study. Sequencer. Subject 09. After much consideration, I have considered that Subject 9 is no longer fit for experimental testing due to unpredictable adaptations within the sequencer system. Number 9 has learned to push the boundaries of the options available for it, and its mind has become a more powerful conductor than the sequencer machine itself. Due to the instability of the current software, limitations of our understanding, and the potential safety hazards of our team, I recommend Number 9 be expunged immediately. Subject 9 has heightened perceptive awareness, due both to a curiosity and a fear of its environment, possesses leadership qualities which tend to be amplified when in high-stress situations, would prefer to see rather than be seen. Subject 9 has little respect for others' personal space and properties, prioritizes social currency as a function in society and will go to criminal lengths to increase it, high tendency to destroy relationships with possessiveness, and sporadic, untrustworthy behavior. Number 9 has developed interpersonal skills on some level, but it's quite possible it's an act, demonstrates a desire to seek experience. All right. So I'm guessing that ending is kind of what... oh, that's awesome. The soundtrack is available. Anyway, sorry. So, yeah, it's... I'm guessing that ending is sort of supposed to speak some volumes about me, based on the decisions I've made, which is interesting. I think it's kind of funny that, looking through the mailbox is seen as willing to destroy, other people's property for, my own gain, which is kind of funny. Just because I was looking at it like, well, okay, I just need more information before I go in. I don't want to go in completely blind. I guess I didn't even think like, yeah, well, that's somebody's mail. So maybe I am that way more than I realize. This is such an interesting idea. It's kind of cool. You've got a couple different choices. And you go from there and you go through this kind of abstract story. I feel like I don't totally know what's going on with Lars. Unless Lars is supposed to kind of be this, well, he's like a blank block man that I'm supposed to be projecting these choices onto, given a small amount of information. And then that makes me subject 9. It's like, I wonder, is Lars supposed to be subject 9 or am I supposed to be subject 9? and is subject 9, you know, am I just sort of a manifestation of Lars breaking out of his programming or something like that? I don't know. It's a very interesting game. I'll have to, you know, I kind of want to play it again and see what the different endings are like. But you know, I kind of also want to just play more of Hankworx's games here. So really interesting, kind of cool to see, you know, um, kind of cool to see uh, where Hankworx has come from. Now that I've seen more of the later stuff, there's a lot here, and so I'm kind of interested to, you know, maybe go through some stuff, some more stuff. Um, yeah, Lars, kind of just interesting stuff. You know, it kind of like in some ways sort of reminds me of, you know, the kinds of things that it make me want to make horror games in general. So I feel like Lars and I, or not Lars, Hankworx and I are kind of, without realizing it, maybe on the same page sometimes. Just the setups to the stories, I absolutely love them. So I'm probably going to be playing more of these. You know, I'll try to mix it up more, but I'm definitely going to be. If you don't like Hankworx, I'm sorry, but we're moving through some more Hankworx games. So anyway, my name was Fia Gloss, and I feel like I didn't even say that until just now, but whatever. You know me. I'm never going to get this right. So my name is Fia Gloss. Thanks for watching. This was Lars by Hankworx, and it will be in the description. So check it out. See what ending you get. See, you know, what you know, what they have to say about you for what you do. So, you know, check back, and if you like this one, maybe we'll do another playthrough. Why not? It'll be fun. So I'll see you guys on the next one.